My talk this morning is, the title is Meditating from the Inside Out. And I probably should modify it to say meditating from the inside out and living that way too. Because almost everything I'm going to say applies not only to you sitting on your cushion or on your chair, the time when you're formally meditating, but it applies to how we live our life and our practice in our life as well. So I want to ask first, how many in the room or online, you can just raise your hands, have taken the Foundations course? Okay, so there's enough that I can ask the room. Do you remember that phrase taught in the course, meditating from the inside out? And do you remember what's your recollection of what it means to meditate from the inside out? Anybody can just chime in or unmute yourself if you remember. Not if you remember, but more, what do you recall that meaning? How did that apply to your life? And I guess we're going to need a microphone if anybody is going to chime in from the room. Anyone want to chime in? If not, I can just keep going. I just thought it might be nice to see how people integrated that into their lives. So at the basic level, it's about being with yourself as you are, being with your experience as it is, not as you want to be, not as you wish you were or your experiences were, but just being with it as it is. Not as you assume others think you should be, but just being with your experience and yourself as it is. No performance for yourself or for others, no idealizing about what it means to meditate. So in meditation, this means we pay attention to our breathing first, and when a thought comes up, we notice it and gently return to the breath. So we're not suppressing or ignoring our thoughts. We're not sitting there saying, don't think, don't think, don't think, right? We're just focusing on the breath. And when we notice we've wandered, our mind has wandered away, we simply bring it back to the breath. And we do this in a 20-minute sitting period. We might do that 100 times, maybe more on some days. So if I'm happy, I'm being with happiness. I'm just sitting there with happiness. If I'm frustrated, I'm being with the frustration. So maybe I can take, if I'm sitting in meditation and it's a really frustrating, and I had a lot of frustration, I can maybe just notice for a moment what that frustration feels like in my body. Where am I holding it? And then go back to the breath. Like, we're not hanging on to anything. We're not going with a story. We're just being with whatever comes up for us. So we're learning to be open and friendly with ourselves and getting comfortable in our own skin. I like the word befriending. We're learning to befriend ourselves in all our permutations: comfortable, uncomfortable, serene, edgy, not grabbing only for the good stuff and pushing away the unpleasant, but bearing witness to all that goes on in our life, even the messy stuff. And that's why I'm saying that it's also really applicable to our lives, not just on the cushion, because during our day-to-day life, stuff will come up and we can get carried away with a story about it, or we can just notice, this is what's happening for me right now. This is what's coming up for me right now, and take a moment to just breathe with it rather than go with the full story. That's how we learn to work with our lives. That's how we learn to stay centered and grounded rather than being hijacked and pulled off, is just welcoming what comes up. In social work, there's a maxim known as start where the client is. And not where you as the therapist or program staff person think they should be, but where they are. It's the notion that there is an inherent dignity in every individual. And we respect that without judgment. We respect without judgment the self-determination and dignity of the client. So we can see ourselves from that light as well. Start where you're at, not where you want to be, but where you're at. That's where the growth and the learning is. As Maizumi Roshi says, appreciate your life. And as our own Roshi says, become more intimate with yourself. What are all of the emotions and feelings that come up for me throughout a day? They change so rapidly. I was noticing when I was sitting this morning, I was really paying attention to my mind and watching how rapidly it goes from feeling frustrated about something to feeling, gosh, it's a gorgeous day out. My mind is not only thinking, but it's like moving from emotion to emotion to emotion. So, become intimate with all of those feelings, because oftentimes we act in our lives without really first noticing where we're acting from. We just move into action. And if we can stop and pay attention to what's really going on for ourselves, we might decide it's important to take a breath instead. We might decide that it's important to take a few moments before we take that action, before we say those words. But that takes that pause. It takes that willingness to sort of say, what's going on for me right now? It's not easy to do. Many of us found our way to exploring Zen or meditation because we're suffering and we want some relief. We came to learn to meditate so we'd be blissful, right? I mean, that's the image that you see of the person simply, even if it's just a cartoonish or graphic, it's always a person sitting there and you have this sense that they're completely blissful, that their mind is empty and they're just enjoying the meditation, when in fact, that's not the way it goes. And if you hold that image up for yourself and think that that's what it's going to be like, you are going to think that you're not doing meditation right because our minds are busy. The Bodhisattva vow says delusions are inexhaustible. Our story mind is inexhaustible. It will continue to come up with story after story after story. And in terms of our suffering, it turns out we don't have to get rid of the challenging, painful, messy aspects of our life. In fact, trying to get rid of them, generally, first off, it's not going to happen. It's a condition of being human. It's a condition of being human. So we're never going to have a time in our life of, well, when I get this, then, right? That's the story we tell ourselves. But that's just a myth. That's another delusion. So it's not going to happen, I'm sorry to say. But when we think it is going to get like that, when we do think that there's a point that we can get to, what it ends up reinforcing in our lives is either aversion, because when the messy stuff comes up, we try to push it away or suppress it or think that it's wrong, or grasping. We think that we could, if we just do this, if we just do this. So when we don't just recognize the fact that our lives have joy and they have sorrow, and they have days where we're serene, and they have days where we are just frustrated and edgy and nothing seems to go right. That's the way life is. And you don't get rid of one side of that equation. What you get to do is work with it. Recognize that it's normal. Recognize that that's the way it is. And learn to appreciate not just the positive aspects of our life, but also recognize that we can appreciate whatever comes up for us. So what does this look like in real-time meditating? In real-time meditating, what this might look like is some anxiety might arise while you're sitting. And maybe the way that you notice it is you feel tension in your body, wherever you feel tension. And you notice, oh, there's anxiety, and that's not very comfortable to us. We like to get away from any feelings of tension or anxiety. So we decide that, oh, we're not doing meditation right because I shouldn't be feeling anxiety. So I'm just not cut out for meditation, right? So that's something that might happen. But if we stick with it, Anxiety is something that we can live with. Oh, my chest is tight. Let me breathe into it and go back to the breath. Or maybe an item from your to-do list springs up to your mind, especially in the morning meditation, right? Because you're just getting your day going and you're sitting there and you're thinking about, I know for me, it's like I'm thinking boom, 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 boom. And oh, if I don't continue to think about this, I'm going to forget it. By the time I get done with meditating, I'm going to forget it. So you jump up and either write it down or start taking care of something, because that's just your reactive behavior. But when you jump up, you distract yourself from the edginess you're feeling. And it feels good in the short term, but you've just reinforced an impulsive, reactive behavior rather than sitting with it and learning how that feels and just working with it, letting it be. Maybe some boredom arises, because I don't even have to say this, but in our technology-infused world, there is no need for any of us to experience one scintilla of boredom, right? There are so many distractions on just your phone. There's no reason to experience boredom for a second. But it might arise when you're sitting. You might find yourself wanting to judge the meditation, like, this is really stupid. What am I sitting here for? It's not doing anything. I've got 100 things to do, and that I've got to get to today. And that's usually followed by a desire to jump up and do something to alleviate the boredom. So all of us regularly try to move away from edgy, uncomfortable states, but we can learn to hang out with that boredom and just sit with it. And then one last one that I've put in here is judgments arise when we're sitting. I'm not doing this right. I can't meditate because my mind won't settle down. This one, as I said earlier, usually arises because we have some sort of external ideal that we're trying to reach, some picture in our head of what meditation is about. And that's clearly not meditating from the inside out, right? Because you're using some external image to sort of guide what you're supposed to be experiencing. Meditating from the inside out is about sticking with your own experience, not imposing some picture you have, but being with yourself as you are. So we're not approaching meditation as a tool for getting to some sort of ideal. Rather, it's a practice that cultivates a capacity for working with the life you have and all that comes up in it. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here. You're all here, right? You're all sitting. But don't we all occasionally wonder if we're doing it right? Every once in a while, doesn't it pop up in your head, like, am I really doing, is this really the best way to do it? Have I read enough instructions? Let me go get another 3 books. But actually, I did read one book by a guy whose name is Mark Epstein. He's a Buddhist teacher and also a psychiatrist. And one just little paragraph, he was talking about the fact that, there's not a lot of instruction in Zen about meditating. Watch your breath. And bring your, when you notice you've gone astray, bring your focus back to your breath. That's it. That's not a lot for those of us who are used to instruction manuals or following multiple complex instructions. So at some point, we all have to make it our own. You get those 2 instructions and then make it your own. And so there isn't some special, oh, I've got this meditation thing now because now I'm doing it like this expert person is doing it. You have to make it your own. So doing this over and over and over is the training of the mind. And over time, we cultivate some capacity for being with ourselves and not being hijacked by our thoughts, not being hijacked by our impulsivity, not being hijacked so that we say or do things unskillfully. In meditation and off the cushion, we begin to feel a bit more grounded, a little more stable, and not so whipsawed by life. And we're able to stand our ground in situations that previously activated us. Or minimally, we're able to recognize when we've been pulled off the beam, and we're able to get back on it more quickly than maybe we did before. There's a Pema Chodron quote, which I think is wonderful. She says, "The steadfastness we develop in meditation is a willingness to stay. It may seem silly, but meditation actually isn't too unlike training a dog. We learn to stay." I love that quote. It reminds me of how impatient we can get with a dog or a child when they're fidgety and unable to sit still or whatever, but we have the exact same difficulty ourselves as an adult. It's just that we have more autonomy and agency to decide how to soothe ourselves and not get yelled at, right? But, when you're sitting, sit, sit like you want your dog to sit or you want your child to sit. Just remind yourself, it's not so easy. Another quote I read recently is, "When longing, ambition, and doubt arise, one need not follow. Not following thoughts into habitual patterns is the effort that engages the awakened state in this present moment." So our minds go. We don't have to follow. We have a choice to notice it and stay. Cultivating the courage to notice what is going on in your thoughts and body, and beginning to practice being with yourself as you are. It's no small thing. So this is a good point for a caveat about using the appropriate tools in our life. If you're dealing with trauma, it's so important you access professional help. If you're dealing with loss, grief, relationship issues, depression, be sure to get professional help. Meditation can be a good adjunct to those things, but it cannot replace it. So use appropriate tools. I just always like to remind people of that because we need to use the tools that are available to us. Meditation and a spiritual path needs to have a priority in our lives, but it maybe is not the only thing we need in our lives at certain times. So we're learning not only to be with ourselves and appreciate ourselves, trust ourselves, to have confidence in our capacity for dealing with life. We're uncovering our own voice, our own footing in the world. And when I thought about this a little bit more, that really when we're getting grounded, what we're talking about is not being whipsawed by the world, but to come from inside out, to find our own voice and trust ourselves. It reminded me of a book I had read several years ago. It's this one by Sharon Salzberg, who most of you are familiar with her name. And it's called Faith, Trusting Your Own Deepest Experience. And it's part memoir and part talking about faith in Buddhist terms. And I want to just share a few of her thoughts on this. So traditionally, faith is thought of as a belief that is held without evidence, right? That's traditionally, you believe in a higher being without evidence of that being there. But it's a little different in Buddhism. She says the word in Pali, usually translated as faith, confidence, or trust, is the word sada. And sada literally means to place the heart upon. It's a verb. So faith is not something we have or don't have. It's something we do. Sada is the willingness to take the next step, to see the unknown as an adventure, and to launch a journey. To her, faith is to keep walking forward even in the dark. It's the strength to take that magnitude of risk, though you know not what lies ahead. Faith is the quality of the heart that impels us to seek what is constant and whole. But she says that this willingness to take a journey into the unknown is important, because despite our desire for this constancy and wholeness and for our lives to hold firm, we see that it never does. We're planning a career move when suddenly illness threatens everything. We've settled comfortably into being alone when we meet someone and fall in love. There's always change, and change can be uncomfortable and even terrifying. So to be open to life, we need to first acknowledge that what we can't control, and then we can begin to value and trust in our own inner strength and wisdom, which can remain unbroken no matter what our circumstance is. So we begin to place our faith in our own experience. We could call this living from the inside out. Faith as a verb helps us approach life with a sense of possibility rather than foreboding or hopelessness. It dares us to imagine what we might be capable of. It enables us to reach for what we don't yet know with a measure of courage. And she says, my own faith has taught me that whatever disappointments I might meet, I can try again, trust again, and love again. And she distinguishes three kinds of faith that she presents as the spiritual journey. And these are bright faith, verified faith, and abiding faith. And bright faith she talks about as a sense of being able to draw near, to open up, to be inspired. And this happens when we meet somebody, maybe a teacher who just is like the best thing. Everything they say is just opening our heart and making us feel so inspired, and that there's so much possibility. Or maybe it's a book we read, and so now it's the author that we're just like, oh my gosh, anything this author says is just, we're telling everybody about this person. That's bright faith. Somehow the experience is about them and who they are. We feel very inspired and moved. There is an emotional quality of wonderment, of excitement, and of confidence. And faith is what allows us to draw near to that. But bright faith, while it can be powerful and important, is not very reliable. We might meet one person one day and another person another day and find ourselves just careening back and forth between these different sources of wisdom and inspiration, because we're not so centered yet in our own experience. She says, with bright faith, we feel exalted as we are lifted out of our normal sense of significance, thrilled as we no longer feel lost and alone. The enthusiasm, energy, and courage we need in order to leave the safe path, to stop aligning ourselves with the familiar or the convenient, arises with bright faith. It enables us to step out, step away, and see what we can make of our lives. But she says bright faith is tricky. It's such an incredible feeling that we don't want to do anything to rock the boat. So we don't want to do anything to threaten our proximity to what seems to be the source of our inspiring feelings. And so what can happen is that we become afraid to question. So when doubts arise, we sort of shut them down, because we're afraid if we voice them, we might lose this connection to this thing that's inspiring us. Kind of sounds like the beginning of love, doesn't it? When all you can see is the good in your in your loved one. But if we become afraid to voice our questions and our doubt, then at this point, bright faith can degenerate into blind faith. Unthinking devotion to a teacher or teaching that is mistakenly seen as the fulfillment of the spiritual path, rather than just the beginning of the spiritual path. So she talks about Eastern spirituality in America in the 60s. She said it was idealistic and romantic. She said that there were people wanting and seeking perfect gurus and recipe book instructions for achieving bliss states, believing that this was not only the way to transform one's personal life, but it was also the way to transform the world. And she said, by undertaking the rituals, the costumes, and the philosophy of spiritual traditions, people tried to escape their ordinary lives and become more spiritual beings. And that's exactly what we don't want to do. We don't want to escape our lives. We want to live our lives. So if you fall into blind faith, then that's what you're doing. You're not really questioning, you're taking everything hook, line, and sinker and suppressing any questions you have. But if you evolve, you move on to verified faith, allowing oneself to question, investigate, and explore, insisting on seeing the truth yourself. And this is kind of what we do in Buddhism here. This is what we do in Zen. We say, you know, I'm going to try this. I'm going to practice this myself. Is it true? Does it work for me? Is it showing me something new in my life that I didn't have before? In this context, doubt is not seen as an enemy or fault of your faith. It's instead a great asset, helping us to cultivate wisdom. In verified faith, we're moving into the territory of confirming, checking out, testing things ourselves. Maybe we've met a person or we've encountered a teaching that has gotten us truly inspired, but now we're doing something about that. We're going to see if it works for us. The feeling we have about that path or process is now beginning to be rooted in our own experience. If you come here and you start meditating and it starts working for you, you're not coming here because somebody told you it was a good idea or that you've read that this is the way to happiness. You now have some verified truth that this works for me. This helps me relieve some of my suffering. Salzberg says, when I was first practicing meditation, one of the great one-liners my teacher Munindra offered to me was this: the Buddha's enlightenment solved the Buddha's problem. Now you solve yours. So don't just accept things, you know, based on just somebody saying it's true. She goes on, it was important to me to feel that the Buddha's enlightenment did solve his problem, because after all, here was the very path he had offered. And I also recognized that I clearly hadn't solved mine. But I saw that my teacher was implying a confidence in me that I actually could solve the problem of suffering for myself. There was some amount of energy and effort and actual practice that was being called for from me so that I could step up to this experience of verified faith. And then if we continue in our spiritual journey, we move into the realm of abiding faith, faith in yourself, where we have experienced something so deeply and so strongly that from that point on, there's no turning back. It is not that somebody can then appear to us in the role of the inspirer and say, well, you know, it's not exactly that way. Come follow me over here. It's not that way, because we now have our own experience and we know what works for us. But even though I'm saying that, you know, we kind of know, it's not a conceit. It's not a self-righteousness, because what distinguishes abiding faith, faith in ourselves, from conceit is the fact that conceit lays claim in its specialness, right? I'm somehow different from, and I have this special thing. While our fundamental nature is not personal, it's universal, it's shared. So when we look at the Buddha or a great teacher, we can see our own potential for happiness, for vibrant wisdom and sustained compassion. She says that faith evolves from the first intoxicating blush of bright faith to a faith that is verified through our doubting, questioning, and sincere effort to see the truth ourselves. Bright faith steeps us in a sense of possibility. Verified faith confirms our ability to make that possibility real. Then, as we come to deeply know the underlying truths of who we are and what our lives are about, abiding faith or unwavering faith arises. What might some of those underlying truths be for us? So it might be the truth of impermanence and how resistance to this truth causes suffering. It might be that we don't stand alone, that we are all connected. We are not separate and alone. And what that also means is that our thoughts, speech, and behavior patterns matter. You know, the awesome and indelible power of our actions have consequences. Our actions have consequences. Our speech has consequences. Our thoughts have consequences. Maybe that's one of the underlying truths that you really come to appreciate deeply. Maybe you come to appreciate that compassion for others and ourselves reduces our suffering. And you learn that through practicing it, and now you know it yourself. So these are truths or principles that lend guidance to our life, both the overarching arc of our life and our day-to-day activities. They ground us and provide us sturdiness, not in a rigid sense, but in the sense of being resilient, having a capacity to work with ourselves. It's having faith in our capacity to confidently engage in the world, with our own lives and our own wisdom, not borrowing from the external world. So I want to just say in closing, just a quick word about, this talk kind of focuses heavily on focusing on ourselves. And it's like, what about the Bodhisattva vow that keeps talking about saving all sentient beings? Like, isn't this a little too self-centered? But, it's possible that we might need to work on ourselves first, or at the very least concurrently, in order to be able to extend our compassion outward. I imagine many of you have heard the quote, hurt people, right? Maybe we could say suffering people generate more suffering. So it's not intentional. It's just an inevitable consequence of not being aware of our conditioned mind. So maybe the converse is also true. Healed people heal people. And I'm not making the claim that practicing meditation or studying Zen will completely heal any of us. But if we can start with ourselves, inside out, befriend ourselves, appreciate ourselves, become intimate with ourselves, evolving to actually have faith in ourselves, this will carry over into our relationships and our interactions with others. And our presence in the world will more frequently be positive, benevolent, healing, helpful, compassionate. And how do I know this? Because I've placed my heart on it. I have faith in this. So. Any comments? I'm not going to offer for questions, just comments. Yeah, Robert.
That was, no one needs to hear me say that was a great talk. If you just heard it, it was a good talk. And I think it was had a little bit for everyone, but I think those of us that have been meditating for a long time often forget how hard it was to begin this practice when we were first beginning. And so I think one of the kind of the special sauce of our Zen Center is that we are trying to really be inclusive in a way to remember the people that are beginning this practice, that it is our part of our responsibility is to help them get started. And I think this talk was that and so much more. So thank you so much, Chris. It was just a beautiful talk.
Thank you.
Chris, thank you for making it so accessible. At every turn and every phrase, you make it something that anyone can understand. And so, sure, I agree with Roshi that it's nice to keep it such that people who are new will find it meaningful. But I got to tell you, this was so affirming and so uplifting to an ongoing practice. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you.
Yeah, I have to echo those sentiments because it's, and I loved the explanation of faith because it was so beautiful, like to place our heart on
upon it,
that,
yeah.
and the notion that it's really generated from within, and it's really generated from our true experience, and to be patient with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I loved your encouragement about the spiritual path doesn't mean to be competitive. We really have to find our own place and rely on each other for sure, but to really be happy in what we can and will do, and just be content with that. So thank you, Chris. It was beautiful.
Thanks, Diane. Yeah, I'll just say the name of this book one more time because it's part memoir. I mean, it's really fun to read, but it's called Faith, Trusting Your Own Deepest Experience. I really recommend it.
Thank you, Chris. That was wonderful. Yeah, I especially love that about faith and it being a verb. That was beautiful. One thing that I'm pretty literal also. So meditation from the inside out for me also means, what is your body posture doing, right? So can I breathe? How am I breathing? Is it comfortable? Is it not? If I do a little micro adjustment, does that work too? So you're really trusting your own experience in terms of the posture of meditation, and then the breath is absolutely important, and then working with the mind, which you beautifully set out. So.
Thank you. Love that.
Chris, thank you so much. It was great because I, this morning when I came in and started meditating, I was really feeling very challenged because I, last night, said something to someone whom I love that was unkind. And when I sat down to try and meditate, I was really struggling with thinking about, what I should have done, or why did I say that, or how, and so I really appreciated how you started the talk really about like sitting with discomfort, because what I observed myself doing was like, I would like touch it, like you do like with an actual physical pain, and then kind of bounce off and do something else. But then I kept like coming to it, and I appreciate just that reminder that I do just have to sit with the discomfort of it and be okay with that. And so I will continue to reflect on that, but I really appreciate it. And I also love, I feel like with all of the Dharma talks, they always come at just the right time, right? It's really profound. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Robin.
Chris, I just wanted to say I loved what you presented this morning. Thank you. And I too feel like it was so timely. And I just love that you reminded me of Sharon Salzberg's book. I thought that was a great book, and it makes me want to go back and read it again. So thanks a lot, Chris. You always do such a wonderful job.
Thank you.
I really wanted to say I really appreciate the concept of meeting yourself where you are. I think that I'm a bit better at meeting others where they are. And I think that I appreciate that framing, because I think that I know to meet myself without judgment, right? The theory of it, but the practice is really much harder for me. And I think maybe just thinking of like where I am is okay. It's okay to be in that space.
Yeah, thank you for that. Sometimes we don't even realize how harsh we're being on ourselves. I really sometimes encourage people to just pay attention to how you talk to yourself in your head. It can be really rough, really harsh. So that's really great. I'm glad you raised that. Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you as well. I really enjoyed that and really like the piece about the doubt that it's not your enemy. It's something I really love about Zen, just verifying it for yourself and that reminder that it's okay to sit with that and not to look at doubt as your enemy. Sorry, am I on? Oh, I am. Hi. Yeah, so thank you for that. That was really beautiful.
Great. Thank you, everybody. It's always a pleasure to be able, let me restate that. It's always a pleasure to accept the invitation to talk. Then it becomes a little frustrating. And then once I have the talk written, I'm like, I needed that. I needed that. It allows me to do a deep dive into some particular topic, and I learn so much from it. So it's really a great part of my practice. And then, of course, I love being right now. So anyway, thank you, everybody, for being here. And for those of you who are in the room, if you can stick around for coffee or tea and little treats, we'd love to have you stay. So thanks very much.
All the Zoomers waving.